your local farmers markets in southern Humboldt. Eureka, Henderson Center, Fortuna, Willow Creek, and Arcata are open, featuring Humboldt County grown and GMO-free plant starts, farm fresh fruits and vegetables, flowers, meats, fish, eggs, crafts, and more. There is a farmer's market in a neighborhood near you, and find the freshest seasonal items grown by your friends and neighbors. CalFresh EBT is welcome, and Market Match is available. More info at northcoastgrowersassociation.org for more information. This morning, first Thursday of the month, Heroes and Patriots with Mary and John. And the views and opinions expressed throughout the broadcast day are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, or underwriters. Time is being made available on this station for other viewpoints. Thanks for joining us, Heroes and Patriots.
Coming to you live from the studios of KMUD, this is Heroes and Patriots. Today is Thursday, September 7th, 2023, and we are very glad that you all have joined us. Good morning, I'm Mary Massey. We begin today's program a little differently. We will be talking with two survivors of childhood sexual abuse when they were both boys in the Boy Scouts of America. As a bit of a disclaimer, this program is not for children, as it talks about sexual abuse and its aftermath. Both men joining me today are featured in the Netflix documentary Scouts Honor, which aired last night, September 6th. Please let me introduce you to two former Boy Scouts and sexual abuse survivors, Richard Windmann and John Sakowicz. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, honor, and privilege to be here, and that you would accord me this time.
Very good. First, thanks to you both for having the courage to tell your story while you were scouts as children, but also to speak today to our listeners about the Scouts' role in not protecting the 82,000 plus known claimants in the class action suit against BSA, of which you are both included. So, Richard, let's start with you, just briefly, if you would share your story, and then we'll talk to John in a bit.
Sure. So I grew up in New Orleans, single parent home. Dad was in and out, but basically absent. And at 7 years old, 7 years old, not old enough to be a Boy Scout, these guys started canvassing the neighborhood, identifying single moms, and asked them to, they I don't know how to say, they got the mothers to agree to let their children join this Boy Scout troop.
Which was part of the grooming, yes?
Yeah. Oh, they endeared themselves to our mothers. And it was, they said no cost. You don't have to buy uniforms, nothing like that. We'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out to be not a Boy Scout troop, but a Boy Scout troop that was a front for international pedophile ring.
So this was a created phenomenon by a group of pedophiles,
Mm-hmm.
and you were one of the children that they recruited in.
Yes.
Okay.
And many more.
And specifically, once you were in the Boy Scouts, carte blanche, everything paid for, what happened?
What happened? A couple of meetings. We never did merit badge work or none of that. It was all about campouts. And during those campouts, we were raped. All of us, not just me, all of us.
And because it was an international sex ring, there were men flying over to this country to have sex with you and your friends.
Yeah, they did. And over the span of 2-3 years, I would estimate, I stopped counting when I was being raped at about 5 or 6 times, because what's the point, really?
Yeah.
But I estimate that I was raped by hundreds of men, if not over 1,000, and they came from everywhere, mostly Western Europe and mostly Germany. And also all across America. One of the pedophiles told me that he was the part owner of the New England Patriots.
Right.
So these were affluent guys that had traveled, they had money, and they wanted what they wanted, and it was literally a massive international network. And we were
And
filmed and we were recorded all the time. And our kiddie porn today is still on the dark web. And I know that because pedophiles call me up in the middle of the night and remind me of that and tell me how hot it is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. And in addition to the co-owner of the New England Patriots, there were other trusting individuals, if you will, clergy, law enforcement. Is that correct?
Well, in some Boy Scout cases, there's the Mormon Church, which the Boy Scouts was the exclusive youth program for the Mormons, and then there was the Catholic Church. But in this particular pedophile ring, this Troop 137, it was sponsored by a Lutheran church, and I never ever saw any pastor there or any other congregation. All the meetings were held very late at night and on the
Right.
weekends.
Was your mom aware of this?
Now we're getting deep.
Oh,
So I was in my late 20s, and my therapist, who I'm talking to about this, suggested that I go back. And first off, they were busted, convicted. I testified in all the trials. Over 20. All of them died in prison except for one. So in my late 20s, I'm dealing with this. And my therapist goes, you need to go down to the courthouse and get the transcripts of the trial so you can actually understand what happened. And I did that, and I found out that my mother testified, not just me. I didn't know that. And so I read her testimony, and the prosecution came down really hard on her. And through her testimony, it was discovered that at some point she suspected that I was being molested. She confronted the Scoutmasters about it, and the end of that conversation was they would pay her electric bill, water bill, and rent as long as they could have continued access to me.
wow. I am so sorry to hear that. Why did you come forward with your story for the Netflix documentary?
I'm sorry, ma'am, why did I?
Why did you come forward and agree to be one of the 9 survivors of the Netflix documentary?
Well, I didn't go out looking for them. They came looking for me. I've been doing advocacy work for going on 12 years now. So, I hear all the stories and I don't have vicarious trauma anymore. And I thought I might be able to be a good spokesperson. And anytime I do any type of media, national, local, radio, video, a documentary, at least a couple of victims come forward and they become survivors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
John, I'd like to turn to you now, if you would be so kind as to share what happened to you.
Sure. First of all, I want to acknowledge that the problem is very much here in Mendocino County. The last county grand jury's first report was on how children right here in Mendocino County are at continued risk due to the failure of Family and Children's Services. You can find that report online just by going to Mendocino County and pulling up the grand jury's site, and then the links to the grand jury report. Also in Clear Lake, Travis, a pedophile, Travis Hill, was just sentenced to 75 years in prison for copulation with a child under 10 and for sodomy with a child under 10. His victims range from 6 to 9 years old. So the problem is still very much here. Children continue to be at risk, and families and hearts continue to be broken and shattered by this terrible epidemic of child abuse. My story is is somewhat similar to Richard's insofar as the rapes happened on these sleepovers, these overnight camping trips. In my case, it was at Camp Bullowa in the lower Hudson Valley. I had joined the Scouts and the altar boys with my best friend at the time, a kid named Patrick. And we were both students at St. Augustine School in New City, New York. We did everything together. We were Cub Scouts together. We went through the whole Cub Scout thing. And we got into Scouts a little bit later. We were about 11 or 12 years old because we had been playing CYO basketball. Little did we know we were being groomed the whole time. And when we joined our troop, the rapes happened in fairly short order. In my case, I told my mother, who did not tell my father. My father was the sole support of our family at that time, and he had been a decorated vet, a former prison guard at Sagoma Prison, where Tojo was tried for his war crimes and hung. And my father was afraid that my mother was afraid that my father would literally kill my abuser and end up in prison, and we would end up on the streets. She didn't know who to turn to. She turned to the Clarkstown Police Department, which turned a deaf ear. Again, these crimes back then, as many sex crimes are simply not believed.
Right.
Whether it's a woman being raped or whether it's a child being raped. There was a time when law enforcement simply did not accept it. And my mother went to a local FBI agent who lived 4 houses away, Jack Danhe, who is still one of my heroes. And I can't say his name without appreciating the extent to which he just stepped up for me and my mom. And let's just say this scout leader was removed due to the efforts of my mom, this FBI agent, and my uncle, who was an attorney at the time. I sublimated this, but what happens when this happens to a child is your childhood is over. Your childhood is dead. I was listening to The Cure the other day, which is a punk rock band, one of my favorite bands, and their lead singer is a guy by the name of Robert Smith, and he was singing End Song. And End Song is about the death of childhood. I could not stop crying when I was at this concert. I just could not stop crying. Little did I know, when I watched the video of the concert, Robert Smith was also crying. So something dies and never comes back.
John, I want to mention that we have one of the other survivors featured in the documentary, Doug Kennedy.
Oh, great.
Doug, can you hear us? If you can, just go ahead with your question or comments.
Yeah, I sure can. And I would be remiss if I didn't call in to support both John and Richard. I think it's important for your listeners to know that these guys are both warriors. They have put themselves front and center and are doing the good work to try and keep the public aware of what's happening and what support services are available. And I guess my comment is that I would really encourage everyone to watch this documentary.
Right.
To be fair, there's also a very good one on Hulu as well. But I think something more important has to happen, and that is the documentary focuses on what happened to us, and I think all survivors now want to focus on what happens next.
Yeah.
And we need a call to action by our elected leaders and other people to start taking action now to investigate this, to change our statutes of limitations, and not just let this be a moment in time that goes away, but a catalyst for significant change across the country.
Doug,
if this documentary does that, then it was all worthwhile.
Doug, I hope you stay on the call. I want to introduce you to our audience. Doug is one of the 2 co-chairs of what's called the Tort Claimants Committee. and they were appointed by the court to act as the fiduciary for the 82,000 claimants in the historic mass tort action against the Boy Scouts. Doug, do you want to say a quick word about your work on the TCC?
Sure. And thanks, John. I appreciate that softball. I had no idea what any of this was about when I got involved. I'm a college professor. I know nothing about bankruptcy, but the nice thing is that our laws require that there be a committee of unsecured creditors, in this case, survivors. So there were 9 of us that were appointed. The Boy Scouts paid for our attorneys, but our attorneys took direction from us, and we negotiated and fought for the right plan and tried to do the best we could. So I'm happy that the law is written that way, because if there wasn't a survivor's voice in that process, we would have been run over.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the congressional charter, because the Boy Scouts are part of the congressional charter. Excuse me. And also, what has happened through the process, and where are things now with not just the settlement, but changing youth protection? There was a whistleblower featured in the documentary last night, Mike Johnson, who is a courageous whistleblower, and we often bring whistleblowers on this program to shed light on that which is hidden. Could one of you three update us on where things are with that?
Well, Doug can speak to where things are at. I can tell you that I'm very, very good friends and a colleague of Mike Johnson. We worked together just 4 months ago in trying to get the statute of limitations against child sex abuse, the statute eliminated.
Eliminated altogether, yeah.
Yeah, altogether. In terms of the congressional charter, I find it morally allergic that the Boy Scouts of America is congressionally chartered, especially today, after what they know. They are still considered a part of the fabric of our country, and the Boy Scouts of America is no longer apple pie, hot dogs, and Chevrolet. It needs to go away. They must remember, Old Glory must divorce the Boy Scouts of America, because it's no longer relevant to what America is today.
Yeah, I want to say a word about that as well. So this business of a congressional charter is a bit of an anachronism. Congress doesn't issue congressional charters anymore. But when they did, they issued it to a very few select, super patriotic, super important organizations like the American Red Cross or the American Legion or the Veteran of Foreign Wars, and the Boy Scouts were among them. This was back in the 1920s when this charter was issued. Since that time, of course, we've had this crime of enormous proportions against at least 82,000 claimants over the last 70 or 80 years. And the Boy Scouts simply do not deserve a congressional charter. They do not deserve to be in the same company as the American Legion and the Veteran of Foreign Wars and the American Red Cross. And there is a movement out there that was started some years ago by now retired Congressman Barney Frank. For over 20 years, he represented New Bedford, Massachusetts. He was also the first openly gay member of Congress. And Barney tried to yank the charter years ago because the Scouts were so homophobic. Now we have this second reason to yank the charter, that the Scouts are guilty of this enormous crime against children. So there is a movement out there to pull the charter, and there's some very powerful people behind it. That you just need enough members of, I believe it's the Senate Judiciary Committee, to review the charter and to put that resolution forward.
Doug, do you want to comment just briefly about that?
Yeah, John's absolutely right. The headwind on this, though, is approximately a third of the members of Congress have some connection to scouting. And they hear it from the home front. And that's what is going to be interesting, because I want to be really frank here. We had horrible abuse in USA Gymnastics. This impacted a number of young women. It was absolutely disgusting what happened. But Congress didn't hesitate and has now had 3 separate hearings on this. They need to show the same amount of courage and fairness to address an issue that's impacted 2,000 men.
You know what?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things that the documentary brings out, and Mike Johnson was a huge advocate for getting things changed, but he said that it's his opinion, and I should say that Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts are still not safe because youth protection policies and so forth are not protecting them. Would any of you like to comment on that?
Yeah.
Let me just comment on that, and then I'm actually going to hang up. I popped
Okay, Doug.
a positive COVID test this morning, so I'm going to be hacking away here in a minute.
Oh.
John was on a committee along with the Tort Claimants Committee that looked at youth protection, and I would say it's one of the reasons why survivors voted down the first bankruptcy plan. There are now procedures and processes in place. The Boy Scouts convened a youth protection committee, which for the first time had 50% survivors on it. They have to engage a third party to review their processes. They have to have a mechanism so that the public knows when there have been violations of youth protection. And they've got a long way to go, but I think there's some reason to at least have the public feel like we'll have a better idea whether or not they're fulfilling their responsibilities. And it's going to be all of our responsibility to see whether or not they are. They have to prove that at this point. They've proven that they can't keep children safe. Now they have to prove that they will.
Yeah, and Doug, do we know how many kids still continue to be abused at the Scouts? Are they releasing that information to the public or to the Tort Claimants Committee or to any agency external to scouting?
They have to now moving forward. So every member of the public will be able to call up and say, I'm interested in how many violations there have been on youth protection in this troop and this council. So that's a mechanism that has to be created, and they've got 6 months to do it at this point.
Okay.
Now, whether or not any of that's going to work, I don't know. And as John and Richard will tell you, here's the big hang-up. The big hang-up is people don't run forward to report. For the longest time, the average age has been, 40, 50 years old for men to report. So the challenge the Scouts have is to create a system where a child can send a text message or send something online and just say, this has happened to me. And whether or not that's going to even work, it might not.
Yeah. Doug, I'm so sorry you have COVID. We hope you feel better soon. And we deeply appreciate you being part of the documentary.
Hey, my first one, it's been a good run. But again, I want to thank John and Richard for being the warriors that they are. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
All love and respect to you, Doug.
Thank you so much. Richard.
Can I chime in on just a little bit?
Yeah.
It's really difficult because even if you do background checks, a pedophile can have a career of 10, 20, 30 years without being caught. And if they're not caught, they don't have a record. And the other thing I really want to drive home is the Boy Scouts of America, since its inception, is the institutionalized, systematic, and wholesale rape of our children.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in too on the youth protections. So I was one of the more outspoken survivors who got involved in the whole youth protection process. And although the Scouts have made major advances in protecting youth, there's still one key piece that's missing, and that is agencies that are external to the Scouts. So the Attorney General of New York State and the Catholic Diocese of Buffalo recently came to a settlement agreement that included the kinds of youth protections I'd like to see at the Scouts. The investigators are external to Scouters. They're not in-house investigators. They're external to scouting. The director of youth protection is external to scouting. Her name is Kathleen McChesney, and she is a retired assistant director of the FBI. And most importantly, the audit for compliance with youth protections is external to the Diocese of Buffalo. The same should be true of the Boy Scouts for America. They should be held to the same standards. The Boy Scouts need to be subject to regular outside audits by independent third-party parties that will audit for compliance and ensure the protection of children. And if the Boy Scouts fail, then they should take the necessary remedies. Even the police cannot be expected to police themselves.
Right.
Every agency that is investigated, say for instance, when CNN had some allegations of sexual harassment against the director of their news department, they hired an outside law firm to investigate, and the guy was fired, and rightly so.
Right.
The Boy Scouts need the same external mechanism for investigation and for review, and everything they do should be public and posted to their website and posted to the minutes of their board meetings.
Richard, you wanted to have some brief comments. We have just a few minutes left for this segment, but go ahead.
Yeah, in this moment, I would like to speak directly to any Cub Scout, Weeblo, or Boy Scout that might be listening. Or forget about reporting it to the BSA, the tech systems and all that. What you need to do is you need to go directly to the police department and report it. You should never,
With
ever,
your parents.
ever. Parents, well, look at my case. My parent was in
Yeah,
on
your
it.
mother was
Right?
complicit in a way.
Right, so you need to go to the police, make a report, and then they'll handle it. You should never, ever report what happened to you to the institution that institutionalized what happened to you. And if you don't want to go to the police, call John, call Richard, call Doug.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you briefly, Richard, just to talk about your work in our remaining few minutes. And then I want to remember my friend Patrick and the other scouts who did not survive their abuse. But Richard, I'd like you to talk for a minute about the organization that you started that now has 37,000 members, Survivors of Childhood Sex Abuse.
Yes, started about 3 years ago. I used to be with another organization named SNAP. Things didn't go well there. They didn't like my ideas, wink, wink. We just, me and two other survivors decided to form our own organization. It's only 3 years old, and managing the growth, the influx of survivors and victims coming to us, it's incredible. Think about it, 37,000 victims and survivors in 3 months. And so we hold peer-led support meetings. We advocate for them by trying to change the laws, the SOL laws, which we did in Louisiana just a couple of years ago, working on Texas right now. We give them free referrals to lawyers and mental health professionals that we trust.
So again, anyone out there listening who would like to go to one-stop shopping for resources, for reporting a crime, or for support services, Survivors of Childhood Sex Abuse, it's easy to find online. Just put Survivors of Childhood Sex Abuse in your search box. I'd like to mention two things. I'd like to thank the executives of Netflix and its director and producer for bringing this film public. It took a lot of courage on their part to do this. They did a great job. They allocated all the resources necessary. I was only on camera for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, but they spent 3 days.
Yeah.
Here in my home, and we also filmed at Vichy Hot Springs, the Vichy Springs Resort. So they spent the money, they allocated the resources. They did a great job. They were sensitive to the survivors. Just a great job. I also want to remember, and this is kind of like my thing. I want to remember the kids who did not survive the abuse, the kids who were lost to suicide or alcoholism or drug use, mental illness, self-mutilation, other forms of self-harm. There were a lot of gay scouts who put themselves at risk for diseases like HIV/AIDS.
Right.
We don't know how many victims are out there because a lot of them are dead, to be quite frank. I don't want to be so graphic, but there's no other way to put it. A lot of kids simply do not survive. And wherever I go to speak to groups, whatever I do, I'm working on with the county for a proclamation for the Bill of Rights for children here in our county. Whatever I go, wherever I do, I want to remember those kids who did not survive.
Right. And we're out of time with Richard and John for this first segment. Our next guest is ready to go. But I wanted to encourage people to understand this problem more deeply. I encourage you to go to look at the Netflix documentary. And then if you yourself are a survivor, well into your 40s, 50s, whatever, it's time that we offer help to you. And I think that this movie, it's just so powerful. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, John, for sharing your stories. And we really, really deeply appreciate it.
All love to you, Richard. Thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you for everything you do for survivors too, John, and thanks for accommodating our story today, because awareness is everything.
You bet. We're going to take a brief pause and then welcome our next guest.